The gun in his hand was steady. His heart was not. Kang Min-ho had buried 3 men that year and felt nothing. But when the curvy stranger in the yellow coat turned, laughed at something on her phone, and looked straight through him like he was nobody, something cracked open in his chest that violence had never touched. Welcome, besties. Please like, share, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Seoul's rain came sideways that night, slicing under umbrellas, turning the alley behind Guriong Market into a river of neon reflections. Kang Min-ho stood in the shadow of a shuttered noodle stall, coat soaked through, watching a rival courier hand off a package that wasn't supposed to exist. His men flanked the mouth of the alley. This was supposed to be simple. In, confirm, out. Then she walked straight into it. Juri had no idea what she'd stumbled into. She only knew her phone had 6% battery, her rideshare driver had cancelled twice, and the shortcut through the market was faster than waiting for a third one in the rain. She was humming under her breath, hood up, arms full of a canvas bag stuffed with fabric samples for the boutique she was trying to get off the ground, when she rounded the corner and nearly collided with a man built like a locked door. "Watch it," she muttered, stepping around him, and froze when she saw the gun tucked at his hip beneath his open coat. Min-ho's world went very quiet. He should have grabbed her, should have pulled her into the shadows before his rival's men noticed a witness. Instead, for one suspended second, he just looked at her, at the rain sliding down her cheekbones, at the fire in her eyes that wasn't fear, just annoyance, at the way she held her bag like a shield instead of dropping it and running. Nobody looked at him like that. Nobody in his world had the luxury of annoyance. "Move," he said instead, voice low, and shoved her behind the stall a half-second before the first shot cracked the night open. The next few minutes blurred into chaos, shouting, gunfire, the courier bolting, Min-ho's men returning fire. Juri crouched behind crates of rotting cabbage with a stranger's hand pressed flat against her back, and something about the steadiness of that hand, even as the world exploded around them, made her stop screaming and just breathe. When it was over, he pulled her up by the arm, checked her over with clinical efficiency. No blood, no wound, just wide eyes and trembling hands, and something in him, some vault he hadn't opened in 15 years, groaned on rusted hinges. "You should not be here," he said. "Neither should you, apparently," she shot back, snatching her arm free, "unless dodging bullets is a hobby." He almost smiled. He hadn't smiled in a long time. The next morning, Juri told herself it was over. A bad night, a near miss, a story she'd never tell her mother. She unlocked her small boutique on Insadong's edge, flipped the sign to open, and tried to forget the way a stranger's hand had felt like the only solid thing in a collapsing world. She did not know that 3 blocks away, in a penthouse office overlooking the Han River, Kang Min-ho was staring at a single frame of security footage, pulled from a camera near the market, of a woman in a yellow coat laughing at her phone before the chaos began. He had already learned her name. He had already learned her shop's address. He told himself it was standard due diligence, identifying a witness, managing a loose end. He was lying to himself, and some part of him already knew it. 2 days later, a delivery arrived at Zuri's shop, an enormous arrangement of white peonies, no card, no name. The florist swore the payment had come through anonymously, wired that morning, double the going rate with instructions to deliver by 9 sharp. Zuri stood in the middle of her shop, staring at the flowers, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She thought of the man in the alley, the steady hand, the gun at his hip. "No," she said aloud to no one, "absolutely not." But the flowers stayed, because they were beautiful, and because some reckless part of her wanted to know if he'd come back. He did not come back, not that week. Instead, she began noticing things, a black sedan idling half a block from her shop that vanished the moment she looked directly at it, a delivery boy who lingered a beat too long outside her window, a little girl in a school uniform who sat on the bench across the street some afternoons, swinging her legs, watching Zuri close up shop with an intensity strange for a child her age. A few days later, curiosity got the better of Zuri. She crossed the street with 2 cups of hot barley tea and sat beside the girl. "You're here a lot," Zuri said gently. The girl, maybe 8, with a stubborn little chin and sharp, watchful eyes, accepted the tea with the wariness of someone trained not to take things from strangers, then sighed dramatically, the way only children can. "I have to make sure you get home safe," the girl announced. "Uncle says it's important, but it's boring. You just walk and hum and buy dumplings. I don't want to follow your fiancé home again," I told him, but he said I have to. Zuri nearly dropped her tea. "I'm sorry, his what?" The girl blinked, realizing too late she'd said something she shouldn't have, and clapped a small hand over her mouth. "Nothing," I said, "nothing." But it was too late. The words sat in the air between them, absurd and electric. Fiancé. Zuri had met the man exactly once, in the middle of a shootout, and apparently in his head she was already something close to family. She should have been furious. She should have marched straight to whatever penthouse he was hiding in and demanded an explanation. Instead, humiliatingly, her stomach flipped in a way that had nothing to do with anger. That evening, Kang Min-ho received a phone call from his niece that made the coldest man in the Kang organization sit down heavily in his office chair. "I told her," Eugene confessed, voice small over the line. "I didn't mean to. She was nice to me, uncle. She gave me tea." Min-ho closed his eyes. 15 years of discipline, of never letting a single crack show, undone by an 8-year-old and 2 cups of barley tea. "It's fine," he said, though it was not fine, it was catastrophic. It was the single most exposed he had felt since the night his father died and left him an empire built on debts and blood. "Go home. I'll handle it." He did not handle it. He sat in his office until midnight, staring at the peonies he'd ordered a second time that morning, because apparently once she'd disposed of, then guiltily rescued, the first batch from where he could see it through her shop window on the one visit he'd allowed himself. A stupid, reckless 5 minutes standing across the street like a teenager, and tried to understand what was happening to him. He was Kang Min-ho. Men who crossed him disappeared. Rivals who underestimated him ended up cautionary tales whispered in Itaewon back rooms. He did not get flustered by curvy shopkeepers with sharp tongues and softer eyes than the world deserved from someone who'd clearly fought for everything she had. And yet, the following morning he appeared at her shop. No warning, no entourage, just him in a charcoal coat, hands in his pockets, looking, for the first time in longer than he could remember, uncertain. Zuri looked up from arranging fabric bolts and felt her pulse stumble. "You," she said. "Me," he agreed. "Your niece called me your fiancé. She's 8, she exaggerates. She said you've had her following me home." He didn't deny it. That was almost worse than a lie would have been. "You survived something you shouldn't have witnessed," he said finally, low and careful. "I needed to know you were safe. I didn't know how else to check without frightening you further." "So you sent a asterisk child." "She's very good at not being noticed, usually." A muscle ticked in his jaw, something close to embarrassment, an emotion so foreign on his face it looked almost painful. Zuri crossed her arms, torn between fury and something dangerously close to being flattered. "This is insane. You don't know me." "I know you didn't scream," he said quietly, stepping closer, close enough that she caught the low, clean scent of him beneath the rain-soaked coat from that first night. "I know you looked at a gun and got annoyed instead of afraid. I know you kept the flowers even though you told the florist twice you didn't want them." A pause. "I have men who lie to me every day, Zuri. You have not lied to me once." Her breath caught at the sound of her own name in his mouth. She hadn't told him her name. Of course he'd found it out. Of course he had. "You can't just," she started, and didn't finish, because he was already turning to go. As if he'd said more than he meant to, and needed distance, before he said something worse. "I'll call off the surveillance," he said over his shoulder. "You have my word." He did not call it off. He simply took over the watching himself. By the end of the week, it had become an open secret in the neighborhood that the black sedan parked near Zuri's shop most evenings belonged to someone dangerous, and that the boutique owner in the yellow coat was, inexplicably, untouchable because of it. Rival gangs who might have shaken down a small business for protection money gave her shop a wide, respectful berth. Zuri noticed. She said nothing, but she noticed, and some traitorous part of her had started leaving the shop lights on a little later, just in case. He came back 3 more times that week. Once with coffee he didn't drink, just held while she worked, asking careful questions about her boutique, her fabric sources, the loan she was still paying off. Once to stand silently at the edge of a street fair she attended, visible enough that she knew he was there, distant enough that he never made her explain his presence to her friends. And once, the time that undid her, he showed up at close range when a drunk man got handsy at the fair, grabbing her wrist too hard, laughing off her sharp refusal. Min-ho crossed the distance between them in 4 strides. He said nothing threatening. He simply looked at the man's hand on her wrist, and then at the man's face, with an expression so lethally calm that the stranger let go and fled without another word. "You didn't have to do that," Xiari said, shaken, rubbing her wrist. "I did," Min-ho said simply. "I always will." That evening, walking her home because her hands were still trembling too much to trust a bus, he finally told her a fraction of the truth, that he ran an organization his father had built on things Xiari would not approve of, that danger followed him the way shadows followed light, that he had told himself watching over her was duty and not obsession, until his niece's small, honest mouth had exposed the lie to both of them at once. "I don't know how to do this the normal way," he admitted, stepping straight ahead rather than at her, voice rough with something like shame. "I don't court women, I don't send flowers because I like someone's laugh, I don't have nieces who complain about following anyone home because I don't let anyone close enough to matter." He stopped walking. "You matter, I don't know what to do about that." Xiari's chest ached with the honesty of it. "You could try asking me to dinner," she said softly, like a normal, terrifying mafia boss. For the first time since she'd met him, he laughed, a low, startled, genuine sound that transformed his whole face. "Have dinner with me, Xiari." "Yes," she said, before she could talk herself out of it, and felt the word settle into her chest like something inevitable. A few weeks later, dinner had become a standing rhythm neither of them named out loud. He learned she took her coffee too sweet and defended the choice fiercely. She learned he only ever ordered the same 3 dishes because his mother used to make them before she died, and that grief lived quietly behind his eyes even when he smiled. Yajun, thrilled to be relieved of surveillance duty, appointed herself unofficial chaperone instead, showing up at their dinners uninvited, narrating Xiari's reactions to her uncle like a sports commentator, utterly delighted with herself. Their world, for all its danger, began to feel almost ordinary in the small hours they carved out for each other. Min-ho started arriving at the boutique, not with bodyguards trailing at a distance, but alone, sleeves rolled up, carrying boxes of fabric shipments up from the loading dock, because Xiari's part-time assistant had quit, and she was too stubborn to hire a replacement before the quarter's numbers improved. He never mentioned that he could have simply paid off her debts twice over without blinking. He understood, with the instinct of a man who had clawed his own way up before inheriting anything, that she needed to build this herself, and that the greatest gift he could offer wasn't money but his shoulder under a crate of silk at 8 in the morning, saying nothing, asking for nothing. "You didn't have to come," she told him one such morning, wiping sweat from her brow, laughing despite herself at the sight of a mafia boss in a designer shirt hauling boxes like a delivery man. "I wanted to," he said simply, and the honesty of it disarmed her more than any grand gesture could have. One rainy afternoon, a rival shop owner 2 doors down, a man who'd made snide comments about Xiari's prices for months, jealous of her growing clientele, cornered her outside, needling her with just enough cruelty to sting, implying her success only existed because of who she was sleeping with now. Xiari, humiliated and furious, said nothing, swallowing the insult the way she'd swallowed 100 others before, because that was what surviving on her own had taught her. She didn't tell Min-ho, she didn't need to. He heard of it within the hour, the way he heard of everything that touched what mattered to him, and appeared at the man's shop that same evening, not with threats, not with violence, simply with a quiet, unhurried conversation that left the man pale and stammering apologies he delivered personally to Xiari the following morning, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the counter. "What did you say to him?" Xiari demanded later, half furious, half touched despite herself. I told him the truth, Minho said mildly, that your success has nothing to do with me, and that if he ever speaks about you that way again, he will discover exactly how much it does have to do with me. A small, dangerous smile. He understood the distinction quickly. Xiari wanted to be angry at the overreach. Instead, standing in the doorway of her own shop, she felt something warmer settle in her chest, the strange, complicated comfort of being fiercely defended by someone who never once made her feel like she needed defending. Jealousy, when it finally showed itself in Minho, arrived without warning, sharp and unmistakable. At a gallery opening Xiari attended for a friend's exhibition, an old university acquaintance, tall, charming, unmistakably flirtatious, draped an arm too familiarly around her shoulders, laughing too easily at her jokes, standing a half-step too close for a conversation between old friends. Minho, arriving late from a meeting he'd cut short specifically to be there, saw it from across the room and went very still. He did not storm across the gallery. He did not raise his voice. He simply crossed the space with unhurried, deliberate steps, slid an arm around Xiari's waist with quiet possessiveness, and extended his other hand to the acquaintance with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Kung Minho, he introduced himself, voice pleasant, grip just a fraction too firm. And you are. The man's easy charm evaporated within seconds under the weight of that stare. He excused himself with a mumbled pleasantry and did not return for the rest of the evening. You didn't have to do that, Xiari murmured later, amused despite herself, as they walked out into the cool night air. I know, Minho admitted, jaw tight, some rare vulnerability slipping through the cracks of his composure. I don't like watching another man's hands on you. I am aware it's an ugly feeling. I am trying, badly, to control it. You're allowed to feel it, she said softly, threading her fingers through his. Just don't let it become something uglier than a hand on a shoulder deserves. For you, he said, low and rough, I would try to be a better man than the one I was raised to be. It was, she would realize much later, one of the most honest things he'd ever told her, an admission that loving her required him to fight not just enemies outside himself, but the darker instincts inside him too. Minho's world softened at the edges when Xiari was near, though the danger in it never fully receded. His rivals, the Buck family, who'd controlled the docks before Minho's father wrestled them away 20 years prior, had noticed his new attachment. In their world, attachments were leverage. One Avnung Astarusk, Xiari's boutique window shattered. No note, no claim, just glass across bolts of silk, and a single black rose left deliberately on the counter. Minho arrived within 11 minutes of her call, face a mask of controlled fury that made even his own men step back. This is my fault, he said, standing amid the wreckage, jaw tight. I should have kept my distance. Don't, Xiari said fiercely, gripping his sleeve. Don't you dare decide that for me. He looked at her, really looked, searching for the fear he expected and finding, instead, fury on his behalf. A fierce protectiveness aimed not at herself, but at him, at the two of them, at whatever fragile thing they'd built, and something in his chest finally, completely surrendered. I need you to understand what you're choosing, he said quietly. If you stay close to me, this world doesn't let go easily. I already chose, she said. You just weren't listening. That night he stayed, not out of duty, not out of surveillance, but because neither of them could stand the thought of distance after seeing how quickly danger could reach the space between them. They sat together in the ruined shop until dawn, glass swept into careful piles, her hand in his, saying very little because the silence between them had stopped being awkward weeks ago and become something closer to home. In the days that followed the shattered window, Minho doubled the discretion of his protection around her without ever making Xiari feel caged. He memorized her schedule not to control it, but to be present in it, showing up at the tail end of her fabric-buying trips to carry the heaviest bolts, appearing outside her sister's building on the nights Xiari visited late, always a careful distance away, never intruding, simply there, a steady shadow she had stopped resenting and started, quietly, relying on. Her sister, meeting him properly for the first time over a stiff, awkward dinner, watched the two of them with narrowed, assessing eyes throughout the meal, and cornered Zuri in the kitchen afterward. "He looks at you like you're the only reason the room has light in it," her sister said, voice hushed. "I've never seen anyone look at you like that, not even close." "He's terrifying," Zuri admitted, laughing despite the flutter in her chest. "Do you know what he does for a living?" "I have a guess," her sister said dryly, "and I've decided I don't want confirmation. I just want to know if he's good to you." "He's good to me," Zuri said, and meant it completely, surprising herself with how easily the words came. Yujin, meanwhile, had appointed herself Zuri's self-declared best friend, showing up unannounced at the boutique after school with homework she claimed she needed help with. Though Zuri suspected the algebra worksheets were mostly an excuse to sit on the stool behind the counter, swinging her legs, chattering about her uncle in the unguarded way only a child could manage. "He used to be sad all the time," Yujin confided one afternoon, coloring in the margins of a math workbook with more enthusiasm than the equations deserved. "Before you, he'd come to dinner and just sit there. Grandma used to worry about him so much." She looked up, suddenly serious in the way children sometimes startlingly are. "He's not sad anymore, you fixed him." "I didn't fix him," Zuri said gently, throat tight. "He wasn't broken. He just needed someone to remind him he didn't have to be alone in it." "Same thing," Yujin said with the confident finality of an 8-year-old who had decided the matter closed, and went back to her coloring. 2 weeks later, the Beek family escalated. A courier, the same one from the market that first rainy night, was found to be a plant, feeding information about Minho's movements, and by extension Zuri's, to his rivals. Minho discovered the leak the same evening Zuri had agreed, finally, nervously, nose to nose with him in his penthouse kitchen, to something neither of them had said out loud yet. "I think I'm in love with you," she confessed, voice barely above a whisper, cheeks warm, which is completely absurd given everything. Minho went very still, the way he did before violence, except this stillness was different, reverent, almost frightened. "Say it again," he said hoarsely. "I love you, Kang Minho." He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and kissed her like a man who had spent his whole life being told love was a weakness he couldn't afford, finally deciding the cost was worth paying. It was slow and searching, and shook loose something in both of them that had been held too tightly for too long. Her hands found his collar, his found the small of her back, pulling her closer, as though putting even an inch of distance between them was suddenly unbearable. When they finally broke apart, breathless, foreheads pressed together, he murmured something in Korean too low and fast for her to catch, and she didn't need the translation to understand the shape of it. "Stay tonight," he said against her temple, voice rough with a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself. "Not because it's safer, because I don't know how to let you leave." She did not leave. What passed between them that night was not spoken of in detail, only felt, the quiet reverence of 2 guarded people finally choosing to be unguarded with each other, the fade of city lights through penthouse windows, breathless closeness that said more than words ever could, the terrifying, thrilling sensation of being fully seen by someone capable of both violence and devotion in equal, careful measure. In the morning, Zuri woke first, sunlight slanting gold across the sheets, and panic arrived before joy did. What had she done? He was a man who buried enemies and sent children to spy on strangers. She had just handed him every soft, breakable part of herself. What if now that he had her, the obsession cooled into something else? Regret, distance, the quiet withdrawal she'd watched her own mother suffer through with men who wanted the chase more than the woman. She dressed quietly and left before he woke, heart hammering, telling herself it was self-preservation and not cowardice. Minho woke to an empty bed and felt something close to panic for the first time in 15 years. He called, she didn't answer. He went to the boutique. Closed, blinds drawn, a note taped inside the glass that said only closed for personal reasons. He stood on the sidewalk in his $3,000 coat, feeling more powerless than he had the night his father died and left him a war he hadn't asked for. Yujin found him there an hour later, having heard the news through the household grapevine that moved faster than any intelligence network he ran. "You messed it up," she informed him solemnly, in the blunt way of children who have not yet learned to soften truth. Girls don't run away from people who make them happy, uncle. They run away from people who scare them. I would never hurt her. Not like that, Eugene said, rolling her eyes with startling maturity. She's scared you'll stop wanting her. That's what Mom used to say happened with the boys who liked her before she liked them. Minho absorbed this with the same gravity he gave intelligence reports about rival territory, and understood, with sudden painful clarity, exactly what he'd done wrong. He had shown her devotion through surveillance and grand gestures, flowers, protection, a child watching over her, but he had never once said, plainly, without the armor of possessiveness, that he wanted her, not the idea of keeping her safe, not the satisfaction of claiming something rare. Just her. That afternoon, he found her at her sister's apartment across the city, having tracked her the only way he knew how, and for once did not send anyone ahead, did not announce himself with flowers or gifts. He simply knocked, and when she opened the door, red-eyed and startled, he said the only true thing he had. I'm not scared of losing you to danger, he said quietly. I built my whole life around surviving danger. I'm scared of you deciding I'm not worth the risk. That terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced. So I'm asking you plainly, without hiding behind protection or gifts or my niece's terrible spy skills. Do you want me, Zuri? Just me, not what I can give you. Just this man, standing in a hallway, asking. Tears spilled before she could stop them. I was scared you'd get what you wanted and then stop looking at me like I mattered. I have buried men who threatened my life, he said, voice breaking slightly, and none of it frightened me the way waking up without you this morning did. I am not going anywhere, Zuri, not tomorrow, not in 10 years. I don't know how to say that more plainly than by standing here, unarmed, undefended, asking you to let me try. She crossed the hallway and kissed him, answer enough. The following week, the Beek family made their move, emboldened by the belief that Minho's distraction with Zuri had left him weak. They were catastrophically wrong. Word reached Minho that men had been spotted near Zuri's boutique, not the usual surveillance, but armed, patient, waiting for an opportunity. The first sign came in the form of a car that idled too long outside the boutique twice in one afternoon, then a third time as Zuri locked up for the night. She noticed it the way she'd learned to notice things since the night in the alley, a small, cold alertness that had become instinct rather than fear. She called Minho immediately, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. He did not wait for them to act first. By the time his men reached the block, the car was gone, but the message it left behind was not subtle. A photograph slipped under the boutique's door, grainy but unmistakable, of Zuri walking home 3 nights prior, time-stamped, accompanied by nothing but a single line in Korean. Everyone the Kang family loves eventually pays for it. Minho read it once, and something in his expression made even his most hardened lieutenants take an involuntary step back. He did not shout. He did not break anything. He simply went very, very quiet, the way the ocean goes quiet before it swallows a coastline whole. Move her to the penthouse tonight, he said. Full detail, no exceptions. Zuri, arriving at the penthouse hours, later flanked by 2 men she'd never met, and didn't dare argue with given the look on their faces, found Minho standing at the window overlooking the river, shoulders rigid, a man visibly restraining himself from something he wanted badly to do. I'm not going to hide, she said quietly, coming to stand beside him. I refuse to let them turn me into someone who's afraid of her own street. I know, he said, voice tight. That's exactly what terrifies me about loving you. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw real fear behind his composure, not fear for himself, but the specific, helpless fear of a man who had finally found something he could not simply outfight or outplan his way into protecting completely. I have buried men for less than what they just did tonight. I need you to let me handle this the way I know how, even if it isn't gentle, even if it isn't the version of me you fell for. Zuri took his face in both hands, steady despite the danger pressing in on every side. I didn't fall for a gentle man, Minho. I fell for a man who is capable of terrible things and chooses, every single day, to be soft with me instead. Do what you have to do, just come back to me after. Always, he swore against her palm, and something in his eyes hardened into the resolve of a man who had just been given permission to become exactly as dangerous as the moment required. Within 6 hours, Min-ho's organization moved with a precision born of 15 years, running an empire he'd never wanted but refused to lose. Every safe house the Beek family used near Zuri's neighborhood was identified. Every courier was intercepted. By nightfall, the head of the Beek family himself sat across from Min-ho in a private room above a restaurant neither man would name later, and understood, in the particular quiet of Min-ho's voice, that he had made an unrecoverable miscalculation. "You threatened someone under my protection," Min-ho said, not raising his voice, which was somehow more frightening than if he had. "I have spent my life trying to keep the worst parts of what I inherited away from the people I love. You have just guaranteed I no longer have to hold back." The Beek family withdrew from the docks within the month, their operation dismantled not through the violence Min-ho was capable of, but through the surgical, ruthless efficiency of a man who finally had something worth protecting completely. Not a single shot was fired near Zuri's shop again. A few days later, with the threat finally fully extinguished, Min-ho sat Zuri down in his penthouse, the same kitchen where she'd first told him she loved him, and placed a small velvet box on the counter between them without ceremony, hands, for the first time she'd ever seen, visibly unsteady. "Eugene has informed me," he said, "that I am, quote, bad at romantic stuff, so I asked her to help me plan this, and she insisted on being present, which I have overruled, so you are getting the unpolished version." He opened the box. A ring, simple, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious jewelry his position could have afforded, chosen instead because it matched, she would learn later, the exact shade of the peonies from that very first delivery. "I have spent my whole adult life being feared," he said quietly. "I would like to spend the rest of it being loved, by you specifically, only you." He took a breath. "Marry me, Zuri. Let my niece finally get to introduce you as her aunt, instead of practicing the lie for months first." Zuri laughed through sudden tears. "She really has been planning this." "She has a binder," Min-ho admitted. "It's terrifying. Say yes before she finds out I proposed without her supervision." "Yes," Zuri said, and meant it with her whole chest, no fear left in it at all. By the following spring, the wedding took place in a garden outside Seoul, white peonies banked along every aisle in deliberate, tender tribute to where it had all begun. Eugene, resplendent in a dress she'd chosen herself after firm negotiation, walked ahead of the bride, scattering petals with the extreme seriousness of a child who considered this the most important assignment of her life. Min-ho, watching Zuri walk toward him in the golden afternoon light, felt every hardened, guarded piece of himself settle, finally, into something like peace. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said, and Min-ho did, slow and reverent, in front of everyone, no longer a secret, no longer surveillance disguised as devotion, just a man claiming, openly and completely, the woman who had walked into his chaos and made him want to be someone worth keeping. 1 year later, Zuri stood in the doorway of the boutique, expanded now, thriving, no longer hiding behind protection, but standing openly, proudly, as Kang Min-ho's wife and her own woman in equal measure, one hand resting against the gentle curve of her stomach. Min-ho arrived, as he always did, precisely when she needed him, and knelt without a word to press a kiss against the swell where their child grew, safe, wanted, already loved beyond measure, by a man who had once believed he had no softness left to give. Eugene, older now, arms crossed with the satisfaction of someone who had called it from the very beginning, grinned at them both. "I'm never following anyone home again," she announced, "unless it's my new cousin, and only because I want to, not because Uncle makes me." Min-ho looked up at Zuri, love written plainly across a face the world had once only known as fearsome, and understood, at last, that the girl in the yellow coat, who had refused to be afraid of him, had given him everything he never knew he was missing. Later that evening, after the shop had closed and the street lamps flickered on outside, Eugene sat between them on the boutique's small couch, one hand resting proudly against Zuri's stomach, as though she personally were responsible for the miracle growing there, already drafting a list of names she deemed acceptable for her future cousin, vetoing anything she considered boring, with the same fierce authority she'd once used to complain about surveillance duty. Min-ho watched the two of them bicker good-naturedly over baby names, Zuri's laughter filling the small shop that had once been the site of a shattered window and a black rose, now filled instead with peonies, family, and a peace he had never once believed a man like him was allowed to keep. He thought back sometimes to the rain-soaked alley where it had all begun, the gun in his hand, the stranger who hadn't screamed, the crack that had opened in his chest the moment she looked at him without fear. He had spent his whole life believing love was a liability in a world like his, a weakness enemies would exploit the first chance they got. He had been wrong. Love, it turned out, had made him more dangerous, not less, because now he had something worth becoming unstoppable for, and a family, however unconventional its beginning, worth guarding with everything he was. "Uncle," Eugene said suddenly, breaking his thoughts, "when the baby comes, I'm not following it home from school either. I'm just going to walk with it, like a real family, not a spy mission." Min-ho laughed, full, unguarded, the sound of a man completely at peace, and pulled his family close.